Hello, everyone. I apologize for the sawing in the background, so there's that noise. Anyway, this is really exciting and so wonderful to see all your faces. Thank you for joining iTech's Lunch and Learn series, bringing insightful and inspiring educational programs through the virtual lens of the Israel Tennyson Education Centers. Before we begin, we ask that
Wait.
Someone muted me. Yep.
I muted everyone.
So before we begin, just a few things. You'll be on mute the entire call. We see you, so just know that. And we will open the floor for questions at the end. You can submit them through the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and Jacqueline Glodstein will ask on your behalf. Today will feature an unforgettable and memorable conversation on the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice, Justice You Will Pursue, with Professor Abbe Gluck and Rabbi David Steinhardt. Abbe is Professor of Law and the founding faculty director of the Solomon Center for Health Law and Policy at Yale Law School. She is also Professor of Internal Medicine at Yale School of Medicine. She earned her JD from Yale Law School and clerked after law school for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And Rabbi David Steinhardt has been the senior rabbi at B'nai Torah congregation, serving the Boca Raton community for more than 20 years. And Rabbi Steinhardt serves actively on many community boards, and we are honored that he is a member of the iTech Board of Directors. So Rabbi, I am going to turn this over to you. Thank you.
103. I want to hear this.
Rabbi, you have to unmute yourself, please.
Okay. So thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Wendy. What Wendy failed to mention is her mother is also a member of our congregation. It's good to see you. This is really a privilege. I don't want to take too much time in my introduction because I know that we all really want to hear from our guest, from Professor Abbe Gluck. The little you heard from Wendy touches the surface of Abbe's accomplishments. In addition to her extraordinary academic work, Abbe has extensive experience on all levels of government. She has served in the administration of New Jersey Governor Corzine as advisor to his Attorney General and Chief of Staff. She's been a counsel to Michael Bloomberg's Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services. She's worked in the United States Senate for Senator Paul Sarbanes of Maryland. She was associated with the Paul Weiss Law Firm in New York City. As you heard, her BA is from Yale, as is her JD from Yale Law School. She's published extensively, and her most recent book is The $1 Trillion Revolution: How the Affordable Care Act Transformed Politics, Law, and Healthcare in America, which she published together with Zeke Emanuel. She's published in the Yale Law Journal, Harvard Law Review, Stanford Law Review, Columbia Law Review, in addition to the New England Journal of Medicine. Undoubtedly, Abbe is very busy now with her concerns for the ACA, which probably could fill our next conversation. And I don't know if the Israel Tennis Center wants to book you, or if we can book you through another organization also, because what you have done in that area and what you continue to speak about is very critical for everyone who's here and for our entire nation. There is much more. But today, what we're going to have is a taste of Abbe's experience clerking for and truly getting to know and being in a very significant relationship with the great late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That will be our topic. So Abbe, thank you for joining us. On
Thank you,
behalf
Rabbi.
of iTech,
Such a nice introduction. I'm always happy to speak about healthcare to anyone who will listen.
Okay. Well, I think we all want to listen to that too. So let's begin with the most recent period in relation to Justice Ginsburg. Can you describe a little bit about the mourning rituals, the practices that were exhibited in Washington surrounding the justice's death? Were there certain things that were unique about it because she was Jewish? Were there aspects that were unique to it just simply because of the woman, the great woman and jurist that she was?
Thank you. This is a nice question. So just so you all know, I've known Justice Ginsburg since the year 2000. I met her when I interviewed for her in that year, and I clerked for her in 2003 to 2004. Every Supreme Court justice takes 4 young lawyers per year to spend a year with them. It's a grueling, all hours of the day kind of job. But then once you get through it, it's really a lifelong blessing and relationship. And I cherished every moment of that and would go back in time and do it again if I could, even though I never saw my husband until 11 o'clock any night that whole year. So it used to be a joke. I'd call from the office, put on the pasta, and I would run home. So we'd have my dinner for me, waiting for me. I'd be so hungry. So I actually found out that Justice Ginsburg passed on Erev Rosh Hashanah like everybody else. I was actually driving to my brother's house for dinner, and a friend called me crying to tell me. And my daughter was in the back. My daughter's name is Ruth. My mother's name is Ruth. But it's a really wonderful, it's been a happy coincidence that the justice and my daughter have always celebrated. And my daughter from the back yelled, "Oh no, she won't get my most recent letter." And I think that tells you a lot about Justice Ginsburg, that my 8-year-old daughter had written her a letter and was sure she would get a handwritten note in response, which she definitely would have. It had been sent a week earlier. When a Supreme Court justice dies, there are certain rituals that have a lot of a relationship to Jewish rituals. I learned this year that I never would have expected. Justice Ginsburg was such a momentous figure that those rituals took on a different meaning and were much bigger because of her iconic, sort of remarkably iconic stance. And one thing I would just say to start out is just think how, we all love her, but just think how miraculous it is that an 87-year-old woman was a feminist icon of strength, a female strength to all of these little girls, right? I was in DC for a week. The court plaza was filled with little girls of all ethnicities dressed like Justice Ginsburg, coming to pay their respects. There were so many fathers who took their daughters. It was really moving to be standing there and seeing all these people coming, especially all of these little girls of every race, every age, and to see how much it meant. A lot of teenage girls actually came and were crying. I thought that was actually unbelievably remarkable. So not to belabor too much, but there's a tradition that the law clerks stand to receive the casket, and the law clerks did do that. If you saw the New York Times on that morning, there was a very dramatic, and the Florida papers also had similarly a very dramatic picture of 130 of us, just 130 out of Justice Ginsburg's 169 law clerks dropped everything during the pandemic, drove from Michigan to DC, from North Carolina to DC, flew across the country, wrapped in goggles and masks to come and be at the court. And they placed us all over the plaza to wait for her to be safe for COVID, but also it was pretty dramatic just to show sort of the support that she received. Her casket went in, and there's traditionally a very short service that happens in the courtroom. And what was unique is that a female rabbi from a conservative congregation in Washington, D.C. actually performed that service. I think that was the first time that had ever happened. And actually, she just started in Hebrew, singing the memorial prayer. And she belted it. She sang it so loudly and so beautifully and so strongly that you could hear those Hebrew words like flowing out of the walls of the court and into the plaza. It was extremely moving. She gave a very traditional Jewish service. But of course, the fact that it was a female rabbi in the chambers of the Supreme Court was really momentous. The Supreme Court also has some mourning rituals that are very similar to Jewish rituals. So the justices' chairs draped in the same kind of curtain, black curtain that we would use on our mirrors if one of our loved ones passed. That's a tradition when the justice dies. And then there's this other incredible tradition, which is that members of the public can pay their respect, and the justices' law clerks stand by the casket side with a member of the Supreme Court Honor Guard, the police, to stand vigil. And that, of course, is very similar to the Jewish tradition of having a witness stand with the deceased until the body is laid to rest. In Justice Ginsburg's case, they were expecting so many people that they had us there for 48 hours, standing with the casket in front of the court through the night. So I was there 2 a.m., 6 a.m., 11 p.m., 3 p.m. So we all had shifts through the night and standing next to her. And that was very, very moving, but at the same time, watching everyone who came to pay their respects at all of those hours, the kinds of people from all walks of life was really incredible.
Your relationship with her certainly was one of a clerk to a mentor, but I think I get the sense from having spoken to you and heard about it that it also was very personal in many ways. I mean, you mentioned your daughter Ruth being named after your mother, but I know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg took your daughter seriously, and all the gifts and swag that she would receive with the name Ruth, she would personally send it to your daughter, which was quite kind. Can you tell us a little bit about your first meetings with her? Were those intimidating to you? What was her response, both as a professional jurist and also as a human being, one woman to another woman? And what kind of insights into her personal life can you share with us?
Sure. Well, just thing about my daughter, she was really considerate of all, and she did put stuff aside for so many of her law clerk's children. She would, she wrote one time, she sent me a coloring book. It was like a coloring book it said Ruth on it. It was a picture of her, and she wrote from one Ruth to another Ruth and sent it to my daughter. And I told it to my father, and he said, "Don't let Ruthie touch that coloring book." So my father went out and bought a clean copy of the coloring book and took Ruthie's copy away, so that we would have it forever. And I think we're very glad that we do. So about personally, how did I meet her? Justice Ginsburg was actually, I don't know, many of you might have heard her speak. She's very intimidating, very small, but from the moment you meet her, she famously speaks incredibly slowly, right? And you have this sense that every single word that comes out of her mouth is crafted like a sculpture, right? And she thought, and so when you meet her, it's a daunting task. I was actually told before my interview that you should never interrupt the justice, and that you have to wait until the silence is unbearable to make sure she does not want to speak, and then count to 5 as slowly as you can, and only then open your mouth. So I did that during my interview, and it was very serious at first, but then she took me around her chambers and started showing me things. So she showed me these pictures of herself and Justice Scalia, who many of you might know, very conservative jurist on the court, her polar opposite in terms of legal doctrine, but her best friend in life. And there were all these famous pictures of the two of them riding elephants and doing all these things together. So from the moment you meet her, you sort of got this window into a woman who seemed very small and serious, but super athletic, very adventurous. She was such an avid water skier that the US Marshals had to take lessons to keep up with her. Same for horseback riding. She used to go horseback riding in Hawaii, and one of the guys who guarded her one time when I was clerking said, "I have to go take some horseback riding lessons." I said, "Why?" He says, "We can't keep up with her when she's," and this is Justice Ginsburg, 20 years ago. She's still, she's still in her late 60s at this point, and she's already a one-time cancer survivor, and she's out, galloping the US Marshals. Really remarkable. And she was a great athlete, early in her time. But when I met her, she's also very tiny. I'm very, very tall. You can't tell because we're on Zoom and I'm sitting down. And I was wearing my high heels. And as she was showing me all of her pictures, I felt very awkward that I was towering over this legendary figure. And I started to gently kneel down as she was talking to me so I could shrink to be her height. I was there for quite a while in that position, and the next day I could barely walk, actually, after the interview, from squatting for an hour while talking to her. But I will say that she told me in the course of that 1 hour a couple of great stories about some cases she litigated, and it was so meaningful that on the way home I was reading a book on the train, and I wrote down everything she said because I thought that I was never going to get the privilege of being in her presence again. And I wanted to remember everything she said. And I never would have, my wildest dreams have thought that I would have had 20 years of being able to talk to her.
Were there elements of her personal life, her early personal life, that were defining that she shared with you?
Yeah, many of you might know Justice Ginsburg's mother died the night before her high school graduation. She was the valedictorian of her class, and she didn't go to graduation. That was a defining part of her life. Her mother was very important to her. her mother would say to be a lady and be independent. And what she meant by that was that she wanted Justice Ginsburg to be well-read and smart and strong. For her, being a lady meant being independent. That really defined her. She spent most of her childhood trying to show her mother that she would be those things. And also, it also made her very strong. Like Justice Ginsburg, never felt sorry for herself, right? She never complained. Her husband was a 2-time cancer survivor. Justice Ginsburg had cancer several times. She lost her mother. You never heard her complain. It was more about being strong, being optimistic, right? And always looking ahead, always looking for the future. The other thing about her personal life is we can't really talk about Justice Ginsburg's personal life without talking about her marriage. Justice Ginsburg there are I see a lot of couples here, you probably all have amazing marriages, so no insult to any of your marriages. She had a marriage, a historic marriage. Her husband was, a lot of the boys didn't want to date the smart girls. Justice Ginsburg was only one of 9 girls in her Harvard Law School class. In the beginning of her time at Harvard Law School, she was called into the dean's office to ask why she would take a place that was better given to a man, right? Why would she take a spot? Her husband, Marty, was drawn to her, and they supported each other. She followed him to New York when he got sick and when he was starting his practice. And then he gave up his life in New York and followed her to Washington. She got nominated to the DC Circuit, and he was her biggest booster, well known to be probably the most important reason she got on the court. Spent tons of time. He was very social. She wasn't as social. Very gregarious. She was very quiet, and he knew every clerk's name. And he made birthday cakes for all of us. He did all the cooking. She was banished from the kitchen at a young age by her children, who said that she was not permitted to make anything, even though she thought her tuna casserole was delicious, and her children always disagreed. And Marty and her really parented very equally. I'll tell you one story, Rabbi, if I go on. There's one of my favorite stories that I haven't told anybody since she died, but because no one asked me, but I'm just telling you guys, is that she would tell the story about one of her children was always getting in trouble in school. And during this time, Justice Ginsburg was one of the big litigators for the ACLU and was litigating her huge cases that paved the path to gender equality in the United States. So she's very busy during the 70s. And her son kept getting in trouble. And the school kept calling and wanted her to come down, talk to the principal. And, she sent her husband, right? And they called her and they said, Mrs. Ginsburg, you can't come down here and check on your son and talk to us about your son. We need you to come down here. And she said, the child has a father. And that's a line that I use every once in a while. Oh, and my grandmother used to say, how can you have this job? How can you be on a business trip like this? And I would say, Grandma, the children have a father, right? And so that's the way she approached her. They split everything. She went sometimes, he went sometimes, but it was never all on her. And it was relentlessly equal.
So to transition a little bit, every Jew who's in a public position in a culture like this where we are such a minority, maybe not so much in New York as other places throughout the nation, are often identified as such. And so even myself as when I'm in non-Jewish contexts and in the larger community, for example, I find it funny that I'm often introduced as David Steinhardt, the Jewish rabbi. So talk about how important being Jewish was to her. What were the aspects of our tradition that she might have reflected upon? And do you know of particular verses that were particularly important to her?
Sure. So Justice Ginsburg, her Jewish identity was a fundamental part of who she was. It's not really separated. You can't separate Judaism from the justice. She was a Jewish girl raised in Brooklyn, right? She was like they called her the camp rabbi at her Jewish camp. Recently unearthed was this essay she wrote to her synagogue when she was a teenager about America's role in acknowledging the Holocaust and making sure that kind of discrimination never happened again. So from a very young age, she was always affected. There's a story, she never told me this story, but I heard from several people that she was devastated by not being able to participate in the minyan when her mother died in her synagogue. She spoke to a ton of Jewish groups. And I was, that year was one of the Jewish law clerk, and I happened to have been a speechwriter in my former life. And so she gave me, my first task was to write a speech for her for a Jewish group. And then from then on, I wound up writing all of her speeches that year. So I got to see the kinds of things that she would say to Jewish groups. So one thing is that she always heard this phrase, Saex, Saex, tirdaf, justice, justice shall you pursue, that we may thrive, from Deuteronomy. Was emblazoned on her chamber's door. Someone sent her a collar with that sewed into it. She had a lot of Jewish groups visiting her. If you're familiar with the Shalamith School for Girls in Brooklyn, they brought her a mezuzah early in her tenure, and it was on the door of her office. Every justice has their own door into their private office in the court. That was the only mezuzah hanging on the door like that from the hallways of the court into someone's private office. I would like to know if Elena Kagan has one now. We'll have to go check that out. But Justice Ginsburg was for a long time. I guess I would bet still the only one who had a mezuzah on her private office door. When I was cooking for her in 2004, they were honoring Elie Wiesel at the United States National Holocaust Museum in Washington. And she gave an unbelievable speech. And she used a different phrase from Deuteronomy. And I can't remember the Hebrew now. It's choose life. You know, the phrase, everybody, it's like, that's what they use, like, okay, so her phrase was, I remember this very clearly because it was this phrase from Deuteronomy, and it was like, choose life. It was like, how do we go on from the tragedy of the Holocaust? How do we acknowledge the past, move forward with optimism and a resolute will to make sure that that kind of horror never happens to anyone again. And even I'm a first generation American. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and my mom was born in a DP camp. So very meaningful for me that she, even though she's not a Holocaust survivor directly, was very engaged with thinking about being strong, gaining strength from tragedy, and moving forward, and always remembering, right, your role in making the world more just, more fair, more humane. So I think that was an incredibly important part of her life. She also went to Adas Israel, the conservative synagogue in DC, and she always came to New York, you know, for Jewish holidays to see her cousins and her best friends. So it was, you know, integrated. And there's also, I say one thing, she also often started her speeches to Jewish groups with this great sentence that I love so much. So I'll tell you what it is, because me, I love this sentence. She would say, I'm an American, a judge, born, raised, and proud of being a Jew, right? And then she would say, justice runs throughout the entire Jewish tradition. So the way she described her identity as an American, a judge, and a Jew, always intertwined, I thought was very moving and very powerful.
Recently heard that I think the rabbi who spoke so brilliantly at her funeral spoke about a particular perspective on the dissent, and that the dissent becomes a building block for future growth in understanding of law and understanding itself. So even when on the losing side of a case, the writing of the dissent implies something for the future. Can you talk about a few cases where she dissented that had great significance?
Yeah, she would say that. She would say dissent is the hope for the future, right? Dissent is laying the seeds for what must happen. And she became famous in her later years, in her last, I would say, 15 years on the bench. She became especially famous for her ever more strident dissent. Always collegial and gracious. Justice Ginsburg was never rude, but louder, more insistent, and more directed. I have a very strong view that a lot of this dissenting personality was formed after 2005, when she unexpectedly found herself to be the only woman on the Supreme Court. And that was I think, a shocking period for her when she suddenly realized that she was representing a perspective that really her male colleagues didn't have. And she issued some very powerful dissent in that time. I'll give a couple examples. some more controversial than others. So so there was a case about an equal pay discrimination case in which, this is Lily Ledbetter case, in which a woman gradually over time worked for a company and suddenly realized she was getting discriminated against. She sort of went to the HR department, she asked around, she did her best, she tried to get promoted. And little by little, she started getting more information that really made her feel that she was not getting paid the same as her male colleagues. And after trying to deal with this in a low-key way, as a woman in a company full of men might do, she brought a lawsuit. And the men on the Supreme Court said, you're too late. You should have brought that lawsuit right when you first got wind that there might have been an unequal paycheck. And Justice Ginsburg said, that's not how the workplace works for women. You don't make a stink the first day that you're there. You try to succeed, you try to get along, you talk to people. And she wrote a strident dissent. And then she said, Congress, this court is not doing its job. The ball is in your court. I call upon you to do something. The very first law that Barack Obama signed as president was the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Act of 2009, which is the law that Justice Ginsburg in that dissent called on Congress to pass. There was another case I'd like to mention that people have different views about. The case involving the partial birth abortion statute that barred late-term abortions for women. Justice Ginsburg did not like the statute, would not want to uphold it. It really restricted access to abortion for women. But the reason I single it out is that Justice Kennedy's opinion for the court was based not on law, but on a very paternalistic stance toward women, saying this bill is a great idea because women might regret their choices later. This bill protects women from the choices they might make. And Justice Ginsburg did not take that kind of talk lightly. She wrote a dissent that said, filled with law and filled with data, and then said to Justice Kennedy, thank you, sir, but we women can think for ourselves. And I think that really epitomizes, there's a million, just like, you know, I could talk about case after case that has a similar a kind of dissent. She often used really great analogies. She loved to talk about this example from the Boston Symphony Orchestra, where they, once they started having blind auditions, they suddenly had many more women in the orchestra. But there weren't enough women in the orchestra until, guess what? They made everybody take their shoes off because the judges could hear the click, 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 click of the women's shoes, and suddenly, somehow, they guessed there was a woman. Once everybody auditioned to play the cello in socks, suddenly there were many more women cellists. And that's the kind of example, she wrote that in, I think, to her Walmart dissent. So that's the kind of examples that she would give from real life to talk about how women intersect with the workplace, the law, the education system, the healthcare system in real life.
I think it's interesting to note that her concern for gender equality did not just grow out of a concern for women's rights, but also for men who chose to be home. Situations like your own, you know, calling your husband to put up the pasta. And that obviously was reflective of her own life and what Marty did at home, and the rights of a man at home to be equivalent to the rights of a woman who would be at home. I mentioned to you before that my youngest son is about to become a father, and the company that he's working for is giving him 4 months paternity leave. And I think that that is a reflection of some of what she worked for, and for a tremendous change, societal change that we're all seeing. So I don't think I have much more time. My time is running up. I could go on for a very long time. I'll end with the following. First, another observation, and that is probably her own experience and the parents that she came from. Undoubtedly, being a woman, clearly her being Jewish, all of those things led to her powerful desire and impetus to stand up for the rights of individuals, no matter what their choices were in society. I would imagine at some time in her career and her decision-making processes, some of those desires to help the individual may have created some type of conflict for law for a society, but she never gave up in this like fierce desire to protect individual rights, and that was so very, very beautiful. I want to conclude with the following, and I've spoken about this in my congregation this week. So we begin all over the reading of Torah this week as we start the book of Breshit, Genesis. And you know, this close reading and the slow reading of words is really part of our tradition too. And so the rabbis ask questions about every word, every verse, every chapter, even spaces between words are of a concern to them. And they ask the question about the first word of the Torah, why it's a bet and not an aleph. And they say the reason it's a bet is because what is essentially important in this world has to do with our relationship. It may begin with the relationship with God and the people of Israel, but it has to do with the relationship that every person has in their own personal lives, in their professional lives, in the lives that in our lives in communities, etc. So her relationship with Scalia is really exemplary, and particularly at a time like the time that we're living in right now, where they could be at polar opposites ideologically about law and about the direction of a culture, of a society, etc. And yet they truly were good friends. This was not something that was like made up. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
A little more about that?
Yeah, I'm going to say that. I want to say one thing before, this is the last thing I'm going to say before Q&A, because the rabbi alluded just to her insistence on equality between the sexes. And I think if there's one thing Justice Ginsburg would want me to leave you with to make sure you heard, it's her contribution to her work, her contribution to the Constitution. And it's been my mission since she died to make sure everybody really understands what she did in the 1970s and doesn't just remember who she was in the last amazing 15 years of her iconic status. So Justice Ginsburg radically changed the way we address gender equality. When she came onto the scene, it was women and men are equal, but they get different treatments. Women get special treatment because women get pregnant, right? Separate, not equal. Justice Ginsburg, for her, she wanted women and men to be treated exactly the same. So the rabbi was right that she brought these cases. Her litigants were not women. She used men as her plaintiffs. And she took men who were serving in non-stereotypical gender roles, like this husband whose wife had passed away. He wanted to stay home for her son. A woman would have gotten widow's benefits to support her. This man would not. And those are the kinds of cases she brought to realize the vision of true equality and also to help the men justices identify with the situation in a way they might not have had it been a woman. The Scalia, and let me just say that the United States Supreme Court did not recognize a cause of action under our Constitution for sex discrimination until 1971. Many of you can probably remember that. I was 3 years left to be born, but very close to my birth. I'm 46. And that was Justice Ginsburg's case, Reed versus Reed. So she did that. And so I just will not talk to a group without saying that. So everybody hears it, and you can tell your children, your grandchildren, so they remember it and don't take it for granted, because 50 years is really not a long time for equality.
Yeah.
And take it for granted because she was so successful. So Justice Scalia, the last thing I'll say is they were truly best friends. Their spouses were best friends. Each of them had a spouse who cooked, his wife, her husband. They went on vacation together. They spent New Year's Eve together. She made him laugh. They disagreed on the law, but loved each other in life. There was an opera that was written that's called Scalia/Ginsburg that memorializes their relationship. And Justice Ginsburg's favorite aria is called "We Are Different, We Are One," where they sing to each other and they talk about how they are different, but they both believe ultimately in the promise and the value of our Constitution. And she treasured so much that they were able to have that relationship, disagree on the law, but she believed that he always put the Constitution first, and even she disagreed with his view of it. And I think that encapsulates her as an eternal optimist about the court and our country. And it would be great to have that optimism, more of that optimism now.
Sure. So I want to thank ITEC, Israel Tennis and Education Centers, for giving me this opportunity. And Abby, it was really a pleasure to speak with you. And I do hope that we can do something about the Affordable Care Act soon. So God bless you.
Have my number, Rabbi, we can talk.
Okay, God bless you and continue with your wonderful work. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. Fantastic. We're going to open up for Q&A in a little bit. I just want to introduce Jessica, Bekkerman. She is on here somewhere, and she is an iTech alum. She's going to tell you her story, and she's going to talk to us about iTech's Girls Empowerment Program. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Wendy. First of all, before I start, I'd like to say thank you so much for having this opportunity to hear these amazing stories about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and hearing you, Abby, just talk about her and share your experiences is an experience for me, and it's an amazing opportunity. Jackie, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Go ahead, sweetie.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm so happy to be here and to listen to you and hear these stories.
Maybe at 1 o'clock, I have something coming from Montana. And she might.
Sorry. Yeah. So as Wendy has said, my name is Jessica. I'm currently a second-year law student at the University of Manchester, England, not Manchester, New Hampshire. Yeah. So. Building upon what Rabbi Steinhardt said, yeah, at the time when Justice Ruth was going to university, she was one of 9 female law students. I'm more than a 50%. There's more than a 50% female population in the Manchester Law School. So yeah, the social progression is obvious, and it's definitely, even in the UK and even in Israel, I'm sure the influence of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has reached there, because the things she has done are really massive and just unbelievable. Honestly, to say that she's a role model is a serious understatement. She seems like an incredible, like, woman, person, professional justice. She's just honestly an amazing person. Yeah, a bit about the Girls Empowerment Program and a bit about me. I started playing tennis pretty late. I started playing tennis at 16 after quitting ballroom dancing, which I used to do competitively. And I am not the best tennis player. In fact, I'm a pretty bad tennis player, but I still enjoy it a lot. And for me, the iTech is much more than tennis. It's way beyond tennis for me. It's given me so much more than that. So when I first joined it, I was put into the Girls Empowerment Program, which is a group of girls. We're culturally diverse. We have Arab Muslim girls, Arab Christian girls, Filipino girls, Ethiopian girls, Israeli girls, like Russian girls, Moroccan girls, and so on and so forth. Many of these girls had struggles within their families or within their schools with gender equality, not necessarily because they were from a religious background, but just because a lot of families in Israel, and specifically with these girls, they came a bit from a traditional background. So this program has really impacted them a lot. We have, as part of the package, except for the tennis, we have meetings with the gender specialist. We have nutrition meetings. We have just like gym exercising. We have yoga. We have photography. Basically, many ingredients that contribute to us being better rounded, more developed, just things that would broaden our horizons. And all of these things have really helped me and other girls strive to more in life and achieve more. So many of these girls now went ahead into more scientific classes and classes at school. Many went to get higher ranked positions in the army. I don't think I would have been able to apply or get accepted into law school without the support and advice that I received from the sessions and from the gender empowerment meetings. They really taught us how to deal with gender inequality in a healthy way, in a straightforward and a strong way. We were taught that it's how important it is to support other women and how important it is to stand up for yourselves and just for justice. So definitely this program has made a significant impact on me and on many other girls. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. The program, when Jessica started, was we had 10 girls in the program. It's grown to 150 girls in 11 out of our 14 centers. And for ITech, it's all part of the our guiding principle, which is we welcome children equally from all backgrounds, religions, ethnicities, and genders, and we give them equal opportunities to learn and grow and play together and respect one another. And so we're proud to have this program and really have this giant Justice Ginsburg, small person but giant, to live by her principles, and we're very proud of that. And we would love to open it up now for questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to send in your questions now or raise your hand. There's a chat feature where you can, there's a reaction feature where you can raise your hand. Any questions?
I think Kevin wants to ask a question.
Kevin? Thank you, Jessica.
Wow, this is awesome. And Jessica, God, it's so nice to see you. You're such a shining star for us. With Justice Scalia, it's a tough question to ask. And they're best friends, and it's an unbelievable relationship. It's just an unbelievable. These people have incredible power, and and everything. But Justice Scalia, like, what was his when it came to women's rights and stuff? Like, what was he about when it came to that? And how that the friendship is again, it's unbelievable that they could have that friendship.
That's a good question. Justice Scalia was very Catholic and was someone who would put religious freedom ahead of gender equality. And Justice Ginsburg, he did not agree on those things. They agreed on some things that you might associate with more sort of liberal causes. So both of them very frequently were together on cases in an unlikely matchup that involved criminal statutes that weren't really clear. Right, so Justice Scalia had very little tolerance for criminal laws that weren't clearly written. He viewed them as unfair to defendants who might be arrested for crimes they didn't quite realize were crimes. He and Justice Scalia agreed on that. Ginsburg, they did not agree on a lot of the gender equality cases. They did not agree on the abortion cases. At the same time, Justice Ginsburg famously told many stories about when they would have these disagreements, and many times she lost because liberals did not have majority on the court for any of the time that she was on the court, that Justice Scalia would call her and check on her when the cases came down. So the opinions would come out and he would say things like, 9 o'clock, Ruth, go home and have some dinner, right? But that tells you more about the relationship than about the person. But yeah, Justice Scalia was the conservative force on the court. One thing I will say is that she told the story over and over again, how she came to have a special love for Chief Justice Rehnquist, who was also very conservative when he joined the court. She loved him because he was a great administrator, and she really appreciated efficient people. And so he did a great job running the court. But she also loved him because she saw that he had the capacity to evolve. So Justice Rehnquist's daughter became a single parent later in her life. And Justice Rehnquist moved very significantly to become a fan of the Family Medical Leave Act because he saw that parental leave was very important for women's equality. That was not a position that he took earlier in her career. And one thing Justice Ginsburg loved to talk about was how much it meant to her to see the man evolve over time, especially as he came to understand the lived experiences of women that he knew. She really respected that. Justice Scalia, they didn't quite get there, but they did align in some cases. One of the best cases I worked on, the most fun cases, was Austria versus Altman, which is about the recovery of 5 famous paintings by Gustav Klimt that were seized during the Holocaust. This is Adele Bloch-Bauer, the really famous Klimt portraits. Ginsburg and Scalia were together on that case in the majority, which basically said that the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act didn't hold Austria immune from going back in there and getting that art. And there were cases like that where they did agree, not on the social issue, but on a lot of other things. But that case was really special. Really special to be a part of, and special to go see those paintings now hanging in the gallery here in New York.
Thank you, Abby. We have a couple of questions from Jack Wolf. He'd like to know, what would Justice Ginsburg think of Judge Amy Coney Barrett using statements made by Justice Ginsburg in her confirmation hearing as a basis not to answer questions about individual rights, rights of women, etc., in her hearing for the last several days?
So I'm not going to speak publicly about Judge Barrett because I'm very careful when I speak publicly about a Supreme Court nominee, and I have been making some comments, official comments or comments on my Twitter feed and in op-eds. The Ginsburg rule has come to be known. Justice Ginsburg believed in that rule that a Supreme Court, a nominee should not be laying down the statements about future cases that would then require that person to be recused for future cases. I think that different nominees have taken different kinds of liberties with that rule, and I think some of the frustration that people are seeing right now is they feel that Judge Barrett may be too aggressively applying that rule and not saying enough about her philosophy. It's certainly the case that different nominees have given away more of sort of where they intend to come down on cases. But that Ginsburg rule has been something that's been invoked by pretty much every nominee since Justice Ginsburg was nominated.
Thank you, Abby. Franklin Crutz would like to know about the justice reading her dissents from the bench.
So great question. So it's very, very rare to read a dissent from the bench. When opinions come down, they have a decision day, they announce the opinions, the author reads they read a synopsis of his or her opinion, and then the dissent gets put in a little pile. If a justice goes out of their way to say that they want to read their dissent from the bench, it means that the justice is extraordinarily upset. There's also another convention that is only known to people who are really looking for it. The line is, I respectfully dissent when you write a dissent. But every once in a while you can write, I dissent. And there's a children's book now with the name, I Dissent, that is prominently placed in my house on the shelves. And that Kamala Harris had, by the way, if anyone's watching the confirmation hearings, had it next to her when she was questioning Amy Coney Barrett. So Justice Ginsburg did, and she also bought herself a dissenting collar. So she was fashioned. Justice Ginsburg was a fantastic dresser, like any good Jewish woman, right? And so she had these amazing collars. Rabbi liked my joke, thanks, Rabbi. So she had these amazing collars, and she had dissenting collars. So when she was very upset, she sat there and we came to the court to see an opinion handed down, and you see what she's wearing. You know she's about to dissent. So she used her position in subtle ways to make statements about just how bad this case really was, right? And when she went out of her way to do that, she was saying, take note. It's her way of talking to the media. Now, let me say, Elena Kagan is a much younger justice. She talks to the media in a different way, but she does it too. She writes opinions that are full of pop culture references, and they're very clever and very engaging. And she uses that tool to talk to the public. A lot of times her dissents get picked up in the newspaper because they're so clever, they're so funny. They reference movies, they reference pop culture. That's her way, right, of communicating in the same way that Justice Ginsburg communicated with her own more sort of subtle court symbols.
Thank you very much, Abby. Amy Hendricks, our president of ITEC, has a question or a comment.
Yeah. Abby, thank you. Your comments were amazing, and I'm glued to my screen, and thank you for your words. I just want to thank Jessica, who I feel like I've known since she was a little girl. And the first time we met Jessica, she told us all in front of a crowd of a couple hundred that she was going to be a kick-ass lawyer.
Oh.
And she was, I don't know, 15 years old, and now she's on her way. But Jessica, I know you're going to do great things like Abby and like Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And we are so proud of you, and you're a leader and a mentor, and you're a great young lady, and it's wonderful to see you.
Here, Jessica. Congratulations. Your comments were fantastic. I agree with that.
Thank you very much. Though that is a lot of pressure to live up to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Abby. I mean, I still have a long way. But
We
I
have-
actually have a question for Abby.
Please.
But yeah. So I know Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has a lot of like I know, for example, that she picks her words very carefully to convey a very strong message, and I know that she is extremely productive and efficient, and she and she's a perfectionist. I know that about her. But after spending so much time with her and knowing her, what is the most important thing you've learned from her?
Well, she did teach us to be incredibly careful so we could stand by our work, right? So when I turn something in, I check it and check it and check it. My research assistants cannot believe how much I check what they do and check my work over and over again to make sure it is totally accurate. So you stand behind that work, right? I think that model of sort of deliberation and sort of being successful while remaining calm and collegial, I think are really important qualities. I also truly value my relationships with people who don't share the same ideology as I do. In the upcoming Affordable Care Act Supreme Court case, I am very, very proud that I wrote a brief with one of the most famous Affordable Care Act haters in the United States, a law professor who brought 2 earlier challenges against the Affordable Care Act. And I reached out to him to work on this case together. And I think that that is a really powerful way of sending a message when people who are totally different get together. And I also think, as I said before, that she was a really important role model for me in life about how to work hard, fill your life with things you love, right? Have a marriage that is based on equality, and that you try to live your life the way you hope that the law you're working for will reflect.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer.
Well,
Abby, that was beautiful. And I see from the glimmer in your eye when you listen to Jessica speak that you learned from Justice Ginsburg how to be an amazing mentor to the next generation.
Oh, that's very sweet. I love my students, and Jessica, now you're in the family, so.
Thank you so very much, Abby and Rabbi Steinhardt. It was an honor to be in your presence and participate in this Lunch and Learn. I'd like to turn it over to our chair, Wendy, we're partners in this, and thank you for all you do to make these Lunch and Learns happen, Wendy.
Thanks, Jackie. A little verklempt right now. This was pretty incredible. I'm so honored to be part of this, and wow. Anyway, I'm going to make a big announcement. We have, if you haven't received our invitation, on November 18th, we have our virtual gala. It's usually our New York gala, but now you can all join without flying to New York. And it's Gala of Hopes and Dreams, A Taste of Israel. It's very, spent a lot of time creating this. The cocktail hour will be interactive with curated kits sent to your home in advance. It's a wine tasting tour of Tulip Winery, a mixology demo using Israeli ingredients, and a spice demo with Lior Sarkaz, and then a private concert with the world famous Israeli singer David Broza. So Jackie is going to post it in this chat, the link to register. So please sign up, it's amazing. And it is going to be an incredible evening and will benefit the COVID-19 Children's Emergency Relief Fund by providing urgent services to more than 4,000 children and families in need, as well as to raise the necessary funds to maintain our 14 centers at places of refuge for at-risk children who are living on the edge and struggling even in the best of times. So we really would love you all to register. And one last thing, everyone always asks us for iTech gear with our logo on it, tennis shirts and polar fleece and different things. So we have a pop-up shop, and I think the link will be in the chat and also on our website at itech.org. And that's it. So we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.